Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Ryan, and I am the coordinator for the Leadership Committee for English Education in Quebec, and we're better known as LCEEQ. And it has been a real pleasure for us to collaborate with some educational partners at the interlevel educational table, which is part of the Committee of Concordia University, Quebec English-speaking communities network, which is better known as QUESCREN. And we've been planning this conference with them, and we've been delighted to do so. And we're grateful to some funding that has been provided by the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise. This afternoon, our second day, we have two presentations. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Tia Collins is a PhD candidate in the Department of Administration and Foundations in Education at the Université de Montréal. Her thesis focuses on the experience of Black students in special education. As a former special education teacher and administrator, some of her research interests include anti-Black racism, ableism, professional practices, collective trauma, ethics of care, radical love, and social justice in education. It's my pleasure now to share and to present Tia to you. Tia, we're all ready for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. Okay, so yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to share my research with you on the experiences of English-speaking youth at the intersections of Blackness and disability in education. So today I will be just setting the stage and highlighting why this study is so important, followed by an explanation of how the research was conducted. I will then share what I found through my analysis of the data, and finally I will conclude with the implications of the study. So why is the study important? Firstly, if we look at students designated with special needs and Black students as separate groups, statistical analysis revealed they both experience similar challenges when it comes to academic performance, high school graduation rates, dropout rates, as well as post-secondary options. In this light, the overrepresentation of Black students in special education would not only be a major cause for concern, but also the reasons for this overrepresentation have yet to be documented. Taking a closer glimpse at the overrepresentation phenomenon, it happens in both linguistic education sectors and is slightly more significant in the French sector. And similarly, students designated with special needs can either find themselves included in regular settings with accommodations or services, or they can be placed in special classes and schools. So there is also an overrepresentation of Black students in special environments, with the situation this time being slightly more significant in the English sector. So therefore, this inquiry is intended to shed light, not only to shed light on what's going on, but to address the situation of the very limited data that we have available in Quebec. To investigate this, I drew on Disability Critical Race Studies framework, which focuses on the social, political, historical, and cultural understanding of disability and race, how they mutually inform and reinforce each other. And this is in interaction with different identifiers such as gender, sexuality, and social class, and just generally analyzing the consequences for people who are both racialized and disabled. It is also necessary to highlight that the historical discourse on disability or intellectual inferiority has been intimately linked to a racial hierarchy, which was established through the colonial project. So to prove that Black people had a place at the bottom of this hierarchy, notions of intellectual inferiority had to be mobilized. Otherwise, racial difference would just be nothing more than racial difference. So to illustrate how this dynamic continues to operate today, I drew on a few examples in Quebec media. So the first concerns a psychiatrist that most people want to forget about, who declared that Black and Indigenous people have a lower than average IQ. The second concerns a complaint filed by Black students regarding the use of the N-word in a university course. In a public petition signed by nearly 600 professors in defense of their colleague who used that word, the ableist undertones are evident when the students are being declared incapable of using reasonable judgment to tell the difference between what constitutes racism and a university education. And the last one is testimony taken from Facebook page established by high school students who were repeatedly victims of racism and hateful comments by a teacher, who in the message is reported as referring to his Haitian colleague as belonging to a subspecies. So we can see the varying degrees of how Blackness and disability are intertwined. And this also illustrates how Black people can experience racialization and disability in very distinct ways, which is why I chose to focus on Blackness rather than the broader term of race in this study. So my research objectives were to describe and analyze the special education placement process from student perspectives, institutional dimensions, as well as the systemic and structural barriers that interfere. And today I will be addressing the segments that uniquely concern the students. So this was a qualitative inquiry that took place in English school boards in the public sector of Montreal and its surrounding areas, with participants in both regular schools and special schools. I conducted semi-structured interviews with 20 students who self-identified as Black and who were placed in special schools, as well as a total of 21 school board personnel consisting of teachers, principals, guidance counselors, behavioral technicians, and placement committee members. And as previously stated, today I will be focusing on the data provided by the students. So I interviewed 12 boys and 8 girls between the ages of 14 to 18 from various backgrounds who were placed in special education at some point along their educational pathway. So the students were asked about their school experiences from elementary school to their current placement. In high schools, in regular schools, the findings converge to those in Quebec and others across Canada, which indicate that students feel that they are in a hostile and unwelcoming environment. It is unsafe for them in the school environments that they are in. In terms of the research objective to describe the special education placement process from the student experiences, the students actually had no awareness that they were in fact in a placement process. So many of them didn't know what special education meant. When they didn't self-identify as a student with special needs. And for those who were assigned difficulty codes, they were also unaware of these codes. So for the students, there were two specific reasons for their explanation for their placement, either because they were failing or because of their behavior. When they were placed, they went through a sort of honeymoon period where they seemed to find an environment that they could really thrive in. They contrasted their experiences in special schools as places where they felt safe, it was calm. They appreciated the intimate environment and the smaller class sizes. And they encountered staff who they perceived genuinely cared about them. For many of the participants, it was also the first time they experienced academic success. Unfortunately, when it came to school discipline, many of these nurturing relationships were undermined. So even though the students were placed in special schools that presumably exist for students whose needs cannot be met in a regular environment, the same disciplinary measures were employed, and in many cases, much worse. So after the honeymoon period, feelings of disconnection settled back in. Staff that they appreciated could no longer be trusted, and they were perceived as either fake or racist. And the academic success that they said that they were enjoying at the beginning was also disrupted. So it was kind of just a deterioration based on the way their behaviors were managed. So this kind of raises concerns for what happens next after this situation in special schools, what happens to them once they graduate or if they graduate. So for example, a follow-up revealed that among the 7 grade 11 students that I interviewed, only 2 ended up graduating. There were also 3 students who decided to enroll in adult education because they were failing courses. So it's just very concerning about where this is leading to once they leave the youth sector. Before concluding, I would like to share how the students were penalized for the special needs that they were placed for. So here we have a student under the pseudonym Kendrick, who is recalling an exploitative experience in a work-oriented training path. And he explains, I was assigned to do the workshop and cooking classes. That was it. No math problems, nothing. Basically, we were like slaves in that class. We were forced to clean the whole gym, wash the benches, and clean the basement. Here, Mina is recalling being punished after an attempt to address an incident between herself and staff members who she believed called her a beggar. It hurts me that I actually did the right thing for the first time and they expelled me. I actually asked to have a meeting. I'm talking about how my mom's sick, how I have to work so hard to give her money so the roof can be over our head. I'm trying so hard not to cry, but it's coming out and they're just there staring at me. They're not feeling my pain because they don't know what I've been through, especially as a 16-year-old and a white man calling me a beggar. I'm crying out to the principal and then he just looks at me and he's like, I appreciate it, Amina, but you're not coming back to this school. Yes, they expelled me because I was on a contract and they gave me way too many chances, which clearly they didn't give me any chance at all. This is Marcus recalling an experience where he was criminalized in a special elementary school. Let's just say a kid gets mad. If it's a white kid, he'd probably get followed. If it's a Black kid, he's gonna get restrained. Teachers would come and just pull them off their chair and drag them through the room out of the class. That happened to me once, and I got mad to the point where they called the police. That makes no sense. Come on. So in sum, special education placement seems to be a euphemism for punitive and exclusionary discipline. Special schools could be beneficial to students because of their intimate environments and the access to more individualized support. But based on the student accounts, schools fail to prioritize nurturing relationships and environments over punitive, violence, and criminalizing discipline. This, along with other practices tainted by racism and ableism, render Black students in special schools even more vulnerable to school disengagement, and it compromises their social, emotional, and academic well-being. And this concludes my presentation for today. I want to thank you very much for the attention you've given it.
Thank you, Tia. I'd like to kick off a little bit of a question and answer period for you, Tia, by suggesting a notion that you've obviously focused on some very serious conditions of students in high school. And basically being one who has spent most of my career in elementary schools, I'm just wondering if you would have any recommendation to school administrators and teachers in particular about how some of these issues could be addressed with very young students so that there's a better understanding, and as you know, so as they grow up, there might be a better way of dealing with some of these situations from the point of view of the adult.
Yes, I mean, I did have some of the participants were actually in elementary school as well. So they did talk about their experiences in elementary schools in special education. And the thing that I'm noticing is that we don't know how to deal with the discipline in the schools. And so, you know, we do have to address situations that are disruptive and that are dangerous, but they don't have to be dealt with in a way that is completely punitive. So I think collectively we have to have discussions now about how we can deal with behaviors that are unsafe, but also in a way that is nurturing and that the connection between us and the students is not broken, so that they don't feel completely disconnected and all alone and left to fend for themselves and kind of attacked and unloved.
Thank
So,
you.
Yeah.
We do have a question for you, and I'll just read the question. Is the easiest way to handle it. I think this one is, can you tell us a little more about the overall breakdown of the disability typology among these participants? I'm curious if you had an autistic student, if you had any autistic students.
Yeah, so here's the thing with that. So because when I interviewed the students, and I'm reporting based on how they self-identify. So they, as I mentioned in the presentation, most of them are not aware that they're in a special education setting. They're seeing it as definitely a different school, but they're there because they were being bad in their old school or they were failing in their old school. So some of the student files were very empty because I did consult the student files to find out about their disabilities, and many of them were just not documented. So I wasn't able to really mobilize that as a valid data source because it was so sporadic. But according to the students, they don't have special needs, but they are being placed in schools for special needs. So that is actually a major, major concern that I had, because I think it's really important that the students be involved in their own special education placement process, regardless if they are at the elementary or the high school level.
Thank you. Tia, how do you think language and immigrant status factors in? A PH student at Concordia, Aurelia Roman, is finding extra difficulties for English-speaking children who under Bill 101 go to French schools, and difficulties their parents have interacting with the French language system.
Yes, that is interesting, because I initiated the research with English-speaking youth, but I found that there were definitely students who went through the French sector and ended up in the English sector because of a derogation. So I think it's really, it is concerning that students have to go through almost a special education placement process to get access to resources if they're having difficulties with language. There is one participant who's coming to my mind who started his education in the French sector, and he just had difficulties for the whole entire time. And once he arrived in the English sector, he excelled. And again, he was another person who did not identify as somebody who had special needs. So I think language is definitely something that needs to be included in the intersectional analysis. At the same time, because I've been personally studying in a French institution where there is really an overemphasis on immigration status, I did want to bring the attention to the race identifier, because we're tending to group all immigrants in one mega group, and the fact is it's too diverse to do that, and we don't get a clear picture of what the students are dealing with. So I thought it was really important to specifically address Blackness. And what I found in the research was that whether the students were immigrants from first, second, third, or more generations, they all had common experiences when it came to experiences of racism, and specifically anti-Black racism.
Is a statement leading to a question. To create change, I strongly feel initiatives need to begin with educating the adults. do you have any recommendations on how to start these discussions?
Yes, thank you for that. I think that we are at the beginning. We're starting to talk more about, you know, diversity and inclusion, and these are good, definitely good beginnings. But I think that we need to have more uncomfortable conversations as well, because we tend to kind of just want to. We're concerned about not offending and keeping it kind of politically correct. And I think that up until now, there's a lot of things that we've ignored, a lot of problems that we ignored, a lot of things that are still problematic because of racist policies and practices that were present at the onset. And it's time for us to kind of deconstruct those. And we can't do that without having uncomfortable conversations. So I think naming things is a great start and going forward from there.
At this point, I'm going to suggest that we will move to our second speaker, to Trista Hollweck. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer period with Trista, and then we can bring both of our speakers back if there are questions for either or at that particular point in time. So Trista Hollweck is a pracademic. She straddles the world of research, of policy, and of practice. She's a former teacher, vice principal, school district consultant for the Western Quebec School Board, and leads the Accompaniment Practice and Research Project for the LCEEQ. I have the pleasure of working with Trista on a regular basis. Trista is also a part-time professor and director of the ARC Education Project at the University of Ottawa. She researches pracademia, systemic change, teacher professional learning, mentoring, coaching, and induction. And that is quite a load. So her presentation today is entitled the LCEEQ Accompaniment Project, Mentoring, Coaching, and Leading. Trista, we're all yours.
Thanks so much. So Tia, such fascinating work that you're doing, and I look forward to our conversation that follows to see how our two projects can align. John mentioned it in the introduction that I consider myself a pracademic quilter, and the reason why I'm sharing the quilting element with you is because I really do think context matters, and it's the lens I bring to all the work I do, in that using the pieces of fabric that are already in place in systems and schools, and how do we stitch that together to make a comprehensive whole is the work I do around system change. So the project I'm reporting to you on is called Accompaniment, and I will define that in a little bit, but it is, I'm talking about the project today and some of the key findings that we found for phase one. But part of the process is a developmental evaluation process where I have collaborated four groups are working iteratively to help support this project. So we have the LCEEQ steering committee, of which John sits on, and we have three other teams. The DELT team is made up from university partners from the English universities, and we have an accompaniment practice and research team, so researchers from McGill and Concordia mainly, and then we have representatives from all the school boards, associations, centers who represent the English community. So the project's trying to be iterative, that whole pracademia space, so the practice and research interacting and moving forward. And so the project itself is really trying to get a sense of what's happening across the English community when it comes to support, collaboration, induction, mentoring, coaching, leading. And so we've completed phase one, which happened in year one, and we're currently working in year two on phase two, which I'll tell you a little bit about. So to define our term, we are going back to the early 2000s when accompaniment started to gain some traction in the English sector. But it is a term that's well known in the French community and also in Spanish. But we're looking at this project, accompaniment for and by educators to foster collaborative professionalism. So that's really our guiding principle. And we see accompaniment as a sense of collective mobilization. So it's a process. It's where people work together. you're not pushing from behind and you're not pulling from the front, but you're working alongside and you're moving forward together. And I see all collaborative-based professional development falling into this accompaniment lens. So one of the ways we think about this is really like the journey of a skydiving partnership. It's one person's jump, but we have someone there to support all along, and that they're there in case anything should go wrong and to be able to be supportive. But we are moving forward together. So the process at the design team was really thinking about, well, what are our core values when it comes to accompaniment? And so we've highlighted support, collaboration, trust, and growth as the drivers for this project. And we had to think about, well, what does collaborative professionalism look like? So we use Hargraves and O'Connor's work to help us think about when people work together. It's not just another buzzword, not professional collaboration. It's a different way of understanding. It's got solidarity and solidity together, and that we have a caring community, but we also have that space for critical discussion. So what Tia was just saying is that in a collaborative professionalism, we have these difficult conversations. We move forward together. We challenge some of the ways that we've been working, and I think a lot in terms of social justice work. How do we bring the activist pedagogy in a way that's going to move the system forward through collaborative professionalism? So driving us forward is really thinking about working with people and not doing something to people. So that is kind of the lens I bring to this project. And so we first needed to figure out what's going on in our context, and is there a sense of collective teacher efficacy? Do teachers have a shared belief that they can make a difference together with the students that they work with? And so we think a lot about collective teacher efficacy and wondering whether accompaniment can help build this. So structures of accompaniment, can they help build and foster collective teacher efficacy? So it's really what the whole research project is finding out. So our questions are twofold. The first being around the conditions and structures that support educators flourishing. So we want to know how can we foster collaborative professionalism? And then we also want to know how accompaniment supports collective efficacy. And so we've broken it down into 3 phases, and this is where I'm grateful to the university partners that have been working with me, a group of 10 academics who helped us design a first needs assessment. The second phase is a social network analysis, and the third, we're using accompanying moments, so we're going to do some discourse analysis. So there are lots of different ways of entering this work, and I'll be reporting right now on the first phase. So the first phase is a needs assessment questionnaire that was sent out in June to all teachers, administrators, directors, and consultants in the English community. Thankful to the design team for helping get the word out and support for it. We had a total of 504 participants, and we did a mixed methods analysis as we worked through this. So this is just the questionnaire itself. We had a pretty good sampling. We offered in both English and French, considering it was a pandemic in June, a busy time of the year. So we're working through all of the different analysis at this point, but use both the quantitative and the qualitative approaches. So grounded method when it comes to the qualitative, and we're at the point where we're really starting to unpack that story, and the final report will be available and published on the LCEEQ website in December. I'll also put my email up in the chat if anyone wants to have any slides or conversations after. I'm happy to do so. So we're using a metaphor really of like, what are the blue skies that we're looking for when it comes to accompaniment, but also where are our perfect storms? Where are the problems that are happening? So we looked at the data to help us tell that story of how we can move forward. So a few themes I want to share with you today, not the whole thing, but just a few. Basically, we found that if you want a collaborative professionalism, you need to have this school culture of accompaniment, you need effective professional learning and development, and job security really falls into an important role. And my dog has just come to visit, so that's always part of these fun things. One piece when it comes to effective professional learning and development I wanted to share today is a little bit concerning to me. So we have just recently analyzed this across all of the data points for the teachers, administrators, consultants, and directors. And if you look at the blue line, that's telling you that there are, for teachers, 52% report in a typical year that they received no formal feedback. So when we're talking about effective professional learning and development and growth of a system, how do people know how they're doing and getting any feedback for growth? So that is something that is definitely sitting on my mind, and I'm thinking in terms of the recommendations, how do we acknowledge this and address it moving forward? So in the project, we have discovered that school and system culture of accompaniment have some key elements. So we know that the administrator is absolutely key. They can figure out how to leverage the influence of the teachers, that they know who their leaders are in the school, where the expertise lies, and how to build that supportive community, and also give access to resources as they're needed. That the solidarity of relationships, so trust, care, and mutual respect, is key in accompaniment, as are solidarity. So clear structures for and protocols for how people work together. So collaboration and space and ability and protocols for challenging conversations. That we need the sense of structured support, so it has to be integrated into what's already happening. So collaboration can't be another add-on for teachers. It has to be meaningful. It has to be integrated into the workload, scheduled, time allotted. It needs to be resourced, and it has to be attuned. So I'm not suggesting that we start adding more and different types of collaboration. As we strengthen the collaborative structures that are already in place and make sure that they're contextual to what the teachers would like to see. And that we consider job security across the province, because it's harder to work with someone when we wonder whether they'll be there in September. And it's also hard if you're new coming in to commit to long-term projects if you don't know whether you're going to have a job the following year. The second theme I wanted to talk to you about is one that we know. Expertise is in the system. It's clear. Teachers support teachers. Leaders are supporting leaders. Consultants are supporting consultants. But it's not always strengthened in terms of these structures. So how do we know everyone is being supported? Who's supporting whom? How do resources flow is still an important element that we need to look at. And this brings us to the phase 2 of the project, which is a social network analysis, where we actually start examining across the province in the English sector, what do the support structures look like? So we're going to be using social network analysis to understand the relationships and the influence. And so we can really start targeting and recognizing and leveraging these different support structures. And I think we're just going to move towards the end here on the last couple of themes is really around the significant number of educators are considering leaving the profession. And I decided to bring this to our presentation today because I think it's something we know. We've been hearing about a lot, but it is concerning. So we have the question that we asked folk was, I regularly consider leaving either a teaching or administration or consultant or director position. And we can see the percentage, if you add up the green and the orange, which are on the positive side, I agree with that statement. So we have out of the directors, 40% considering regularly leaving, consultants at almost 30%, teachers 23%, and administrators less. Out of the respondents to this questionnaire. So remember those people who offered 20 minutes of their time to respond to the questionnaire. And we wondered, well, how do we know what can predict based on a quantitative analysis teachers leaving? And we found out that for this survey, it was really joy to teach, the enjoyment of the profession, and then a sense of confidence and then competence, followed by comfort with, remote and face-to-face, comfort in the different spaces, context, and then finally support with different types of tools. So the question for us is, how are we going to focus on joy, enjoyment as we move forward? How do we bring enjoyment back? And so I'm just going to end on this slide here today, because it is really important to me to think about flourishing and teacher flourishing, and thinking about, in general, we ask the question, I enjoy being a teacher, I enjoy being a consultant, I enjoy being an administrator. And based on the pre-pandemic findings, as you can see, towards during the pandemic, our current context, which is in June, we have a decrease in enjoyment, which is not surprising, but it is something to think about moving forward. So how do we consider where teachers are and how much of their own enjoyment, flourishing is at stake, and how the different structures that we can bring to a school system and accompaniment, a center of school and system culture of accompaniment, can support them and challenge their and support their well-being as we move forward. I'm just going to stop the share there. So things to think about for us moving forward, and I hope that John, I'm in the timeline as requested.
As always, you've done a fantastic time of getting a lot of information in a short period of time. So Trista is very good at that. I've had the pleasure of being with Trista in several reports, and she always seems to be squeezed for a little bit of time, but she gets the job done. Congratulations. I again will open the floor for questions, but Trista, if I may just start the ball rolling a little bit, and I know you want to focus on the word accompaniment. And I'm just wondering if, there are so many terms out there, or a couple of terms out there that are pretty common. And I'm just wondering if you would take a minute or two to talk about what you see as the difference between things like mentoring, coaching, and the concept of accompaniment that you're putting forward today. I'm just wondering, do you see subtle or important differences between those, and how should we be thinking about those?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. I think it's really important that we consider the terms that we use. And so one of my aims for this project actually is to develop a shared understanding of the key terms. And so we are introducing yet another educational term into the space, but I do see accompaniment as a really great way to understand all different ways that teachers, educators, leaders collaborate. So I see mentoring and coaching, as you know, John, I see them as different, but similar. So they're both distinct ways of working with with teachers and with people, but also comparable. But I see that as an element and a part of accompaniment. So for me, when I say coaching, I already know that there's a long history, and some is positive and some is negative, and people already have a preconceived notion of that type of collaboration. Or if I say PLC, or if I say lesson study. So what I really want to think about as an accompaniment is a way of working with one another. So collectively mobilizing, supporting, moving forward together. And it can happen in many different forms. So it has to be contextual to what works in the system. So we strengthen what's already in place in the different schools or different school boards, but accompaniment is a way that we work together. So that to me is the important distinction, that I see it as that umbrella term. So mentoring would be a form of accompaniment. So would coaching. And I kind of love this idea of the musician who accompanies. So it's you're there to make the sound even better, but really there's still a lead. And so whoever's journey it is the person, it's their own goals, it's their own growth that we're prioritizing. And as someone who accompanist, you're supporting them, but you're still moving and making something beautiful. That's kind of where I'm at the moment with my thinking.
Thank you. Lorraine, you have a question?
Hi, Trista, such an interesting talk, and I'm thinking about how what you're doing is potentially so valuable for Tia and vice versa. And so my question to you is, and maybe, I don't know, John, but maybe Tia could weigh in too. I'm really interested in this notion of system, which is very global and very fluid. And I just wondered if you could explain a little bit more, like how you see education as a system in the sense that you're intervening in, and how it might, how, like, I have to say I'm still reeling with some of the data that Tia presented. And so what I'm wondering is how could, theoretically anyway, people like you, researchers and your team, support teachers so that they can intervene in different ways when they're under stress, so that it's not violent and racist, like what can be done to improve the system to avoid that kind of very upsetting and negative kind of intervention?
That's a really great question. And I think Tia, when I was listening to you present, like this is the information we need to be getting into the hands of teachers who have expertise on knowing how we can maybe work better, you know, in their own schools, in their own districts. And so for me, it's not necessarily about stopping, it's addressing. Like, we need to address what is already happening. We know it's happening. How do we actually provide the space to have those challenging conversations? How do we make sure that someone is guiding that conversation? There has to be forward movement. There has to be a chance for us to look at data and look at our own work, and then work together to think about solutions. And so when I think about systems, I think, you know, that we have to make sure that we have things in place. We know where centers of influence are. So those are the people that we can help make a difference. That's, to me, why systems are important, is system thinking, because there are going to be, you know, someone new comes in, how are they collected? And then also made to know, this is where we come. Like, we've been doing this work, come along with us and bring your new ideas, but we need to move forward together. But do we have a system in place to collect everyone new to the system? And we don't lose the expertise of the people who are doing it really, really well. How do we leverage the work that's already going on and find a way to support that and build it and make it more of a school approach? Tia, I saw you had your hand up, and I know you have some thoughts around this too.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you just said, and you kind of actually addressed some things that I was going to say. But really, in terms of the long term, I think it's really important, because I remember when I was in the schools, and we were working really hard on trying to find alternatives to punitive discipline, you know, alternatives to suspensions and expulsions. And that didn't happen overnight. That took a really long time. And so it was kind of over like a 5-year period. And during that 5-year period, it was like, there was a lot of resistance also, because we're just used to it. And we have already so much going on as teachers that bringing in new stuff is kind of overwhelming too. So it's like, when we made a decision as a team to really work on that, and it took years and years, and then I obviously eventually left, and then I'm not sure that continued, so it kind of just flopped back. And I think that happens a lot. So when the leadership changes, then the progress that was made gets lost. And I also wanted to mention that it's okay if we don't have the answers right now. We need to talk about it, and we need to construct something new together. So I didn't have the time to talk about what my the participants who were personnel in my study said, but they were saying that they were very uncomfortable. They didn't want to be perceived as racist. They understood that there were problems, but they didn't want to say anything to offend anybody. And some of them even said they were uncomfortable saying Black students, but if we can't even say the word, how can we address racism? So I think that I just love the whole concept about the school system and the accompaniment, and think that's what's needed as a start. Someone asked, where should we start? We can definitely start there. We just need to, you know, create safe spaces to have the conversations that need to be had.
It's that collaborative professionalism piece for me. It's the trust, the caring that you develop in relationship, so that you can also have those really challenging conversations, that when you notice something, we can move forward, but that I'm going to do this with you. We're accompanying, we're working together. These are our students. It's not your class and my class. It's also not only in the hands of the administrator. I think that's a massive issue, because a lot of discipline policies come from administration, but we all work within that. So it needs to be something that's happening with the teachers as well, not being done to teachers, that they have a place to discuss it too. So I think, you know, we need to think about the structures. This may be a little bit controversial in a sense, that I don't think we need always more and more resources. I think there's a lot of resources in the schools and people that know and are really doing amazing work. So how do we leverage that? So how do we use the resources that we have really well, How do we focus and target and think about what professional learning and development we go to? And if it is about safety, and if it's about, you know, student wellness and student achievement, then we need to think about all these elements. And we can all be looking in different ways, but how do we bring what we learned together to move forward? Those are what's needed. And that means that you need to be looking at the structure in place in the system.
We do have a recommendation from one of our participants just in that the school climate department at the Ministry of Education has a document on inappropriate adult behaviors that's fresh off the press. So I really like, Trista and Tia, the way you're focusing on positive behaviors, but sometimes, you know, a reflection on some negative behaviors and what shouldn't be is something we need to look at it sometimes as well. I'm wondering,
although like that's amazing. I'd love to, I'll have to look for that, but if I'll put in my email actually in the chat, but that's really useful. But I wonder, how does it get taken up? That's always my question. So this report comes out and you know, like, are people going to pick up, oh, inappropriate adult behaviors? Is that, you know, what are we going to do with that? To me, it needs to be accompanied with something else. So what's the implementation?
Yeah, if I can respond, I'm so sorry. My camera is really wonky and I don't want to lose connection. So I'm going to just leave my camera off. But basically, as a school climate representative for all Anglophone school boards, it's a document that's fresh off the press. And I'm hosting multiple meetings during the year with the school climate representatives of each board. And their job is to then accompany and work with HR with regards to this document that's going to come out. So there's definitely a lot of work done already. We had Dr. Myrna Lashley. I've just approached Tia because I think she's absolutely phenomenal to see if she could even host at one of our meetings. But I think it's really important to understand that, you know, a lot of work is actually being done, and I don't think it's disseminated to everywhere or everyone. And I think that's where the issue is. So that's something I'm going to bring up at the MEC at one of our meetings, because, you know, this document is already out. All DGs have received this document, and now how do we act on it? That's the plan of action, and it depends on each board. Anyways, I don't want to take up and hijack your meetings. You guys are doing a phenomenal job, and I'm thoroughly enjoying this. So thank you so much. And I'm more than happy to send you the document that's been distributed already.
Well, thank you very much, Justine, for that intervention. That's important information. And as somebody who thinks he knows a lot of things going on in the English sector, because I do have the pleasure of working with all of the English school boards, this is something that's new to me as well. So both your service and any kind of a population, like any kind of a document like this. So these are the types of information that needs to be shared and not just sit on a shelf. And I can understand where Trista's concern is that so many of these things happen in that way. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time together. This has been really, really enlightening. Trista and Tia, I thank you both for making yourselves available for us today. For providing us with not only some data, but some excellent points for reflection. I encourage you to continue in your work. I think you're doing marvelous things for the system, and all of these things will eventually, well, it takes a while sometimes, but they will filter down and they will benefit the students that we are responsible for. So I thank you for that. I thank you for that work. I would encourage everybody to stop into the Agora. The Agora is kind of a virtual check-in room where you can continue the discussions. In order to get there, you just have to go back to the website and click on Agora. So thank you all for your time together. Thank you for joining us as the participants in this session, and a very, very big and special thank you to our two presenters who did a marvelous job on giving us lots to reflect